I'm Shankar Vedantam, here to tell you about a great mystery. That mystery is you. As the host of a podcast called Hidden Brain, I explore big questions about what it means to be human. Questions like, where do our emotions come from? Why do so many of us feel overwhelmed by modern life? How can we better understand the people around us? Discover your hidden brain. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode deals with mental illness, depression, and suicide. Please listen with care. Previously on The Deep End.
And DBS is not going to give you happiness. It's not going to just be a device that turns on happiness 24/7. It's to get you out of the hole and be on solid ground.
So has the device made me happy? The device has made me disease-free. That's all that I needed it to do. It has not taken away the typical emotions in life that I'm going to have forever. And those are happiness, sadness, anger. I'm going to have those, and I'm going to have to learn how to live with having those.
On the last episode, we heard how John had to make room for new emotions once his depression had lifted. On this episode, we're going to talk not so much about depression, but about shame. The shame and the judgment of having a mental disorder. And all too often, the shame and the judgment of the treatment people seek. We'll explore whether there's something different about changing our brains versus any other part of our bodies. This is The Deep End. I'm Laura Sanders. Like many who have struggled with a mental illness, Emily Hollenbeck has plenty of stories of people not quite getting it. She told me about some of these encounters, and one was particularly bad. It was when she was going in for ECT. That's electroconvulsive therapy, and it's when doctors send big doses of electricity into the brain to cause a controlled seizure. She was about to be anesthetized, and her usual anesthesiologist wasn't around that day.
One day, this new guy came in, and I'm laying on the table. It's a very easy procedure. I really look forward to the anesthesiologist doing his job, because then I can just take my nap, wake up later and have my little snack. But he was prepping everything, and he looks at me and goes, "Oh, you have a PhD in psychology." I was like, "Yeah, I don't know where this is going. It's 8 a.m. Let's go. Let's get this done." And he just, his eyes just settled on me. He goes, "Huh, that's ironic."
Oh my God.
And there was this palpable silence in the room. And I just sort of felt like no one said anything. And I think it's probably one of those moments where everyone's just kind of shocked. What are you talking about? Why would you say that? But I'm thinking this guy is an anesthesiologist, of all the professionals, he should know. And of course, in that moment with stigma, the problem is you're always feeling like you're the one who can't say anything. So what really sticks out about that to me is with ECT, oftentimes, your memory is a little blurry, it's a little fuzzy. I remember that moment. It pops up, every now and then, and it still hits me in the chest. If this doctor at this really renowned hospital is saying this to me, what are other people thinking?
So there she was, utterly vulnerable, and in the hands of a doctor who clearly didn't understand her disease at all, and who was about to give her drugs to make her unconscious.
And I think about, for the procedure, oftentimes they use, they have to use the heavy-hitting anesthesia because they need to knock you out. And I wanted to say something. I remember just literally biting my tongue and being we're not going to sass the guy who's injected the propofol.
Feeling diminished, judged, and not understood is unfortunately something that happens a lot to people with depression and other mental illnesses too. The shame this causes can lead people to hide their struggles.
The stigma keeps people silent. And the silence and you staying in your own head and you not being able to express how you feel just gets worse and worse and worse. And the entire goal, like I said, is to have you take your own life. And the more you stay silent, the bigger opportunity you have to do that. And I despise it. And I despise the fact that it exists. It is real. The amount of times that I have had people say to me, snap out of it. Dude, you got a great life. You're succeeding professionally. You got great kids. Your wife's awesome. Like, what do you have to be depressed about? What do you have to be depressed for?
John has ways of explaining it that really hit home. He calls depression a no casserole disease. Cancer? People bring a casserole to your house. Broke a leg? Had a baby? Casserole. Depression? No casserole.
Cancer's horrific. It's horrible. It's awful. Nobody deserves it. Nobody wants it. But if you pass from cancer, you're a warrior. You gave it all you got. People are bringing casseroles over to your house. 5K braces are going in your name, right?
But with depression, it's different.
You tell people that you have it and people will look at you and not say anything. Can you imagine telling somebody you have cancer and them looking at you not saying anything, right? Awkward, weird. If you take that exact same situation for severe mental illness, your entire mind's getting wrecked. You're doing it mostly in silence. People aren't really involved in helping out because of that. If you are open about it, there's judgment from it. And then if you pass, you take your own life. So your own life, right there, you're stigmatized. You're stigmatized because of the word suicide. You certainly aren't getting life insurance. You have the family, can you believe that their dad took their life, right? That's what the disease is. The disease laughs at you even after death.
John remembers a good friend, who finally got it.
With most diseases, Parkinson's, cancer, you don't have to understand what they are. You just know it sucks, right? You're like, oh, that sucks. You have that, right? For some reason, people need to understand what depression is for them to get it and for them to care about it. But I had a huge insight after surgery. A week later, a friend came over. He's been very helpful throughout all this. We'd meet and walk when I could. He was very, send me the tax and be supportive. And he said, how was it? I said, you have no idea. I was like, dude, I can do normal things now. I can, which most people wouldn't understand, that being able to return your phone call is massive. Being able to walk outside, massive. And so I'm sitting there telling him, it's a week later, I'm like, man, I haven't had a suicidal thought in a week. And he looked at me and he was like, you've had a suicidal thought before? And it was such like a mind-opening experience for me, where I'm like, this is an empathetic, kind, caring person, and they have no idea the hell that you go through.
Patient 001 also struggles to get the experience across to people.
I've always explained to people don't understand. Depression is not a character flaw. And what I mean by that is, anytime you see people kill themselves, people that haven't gone through depression, they're like, oh, they give up. People don't give up. They're in a fire. They're in a fire and it doesn't stop. And not only that, not only are they in a fire and it doesn't stop, it's almost like you're possessed by a demon. Like your brain, what it's feeding you is wrong. It's just telling you, kill yourself. Kill yourself every day. Every day, every second.
Hey there, I'm Dr. Maya Shankar, and I'm a scientist who studies human behavior. Many of us have experienced a moment in our lives that changes everything, that instantly divides our life into a before and an after. On my podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, I talk to people about navigating these moments. Their stories are full of candor and hard-won wisdom. And you'll hear from scientists who teach us how we can be more resilient in the face of change. Listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
There is so much about depression that people who haven't had it don't understand, can't understand. But to really pile on, there are even more misconceptions about treatment for depression. Emily remembers telling someone about her upcoming ECT treatments.
I remember I was at a party and I was telling a friend of a friend, oh, I'm going to have start ECT next week. And she goes, how could you do that to yourself? It's like, if you saw the procedure, it's one of the most boring things. Like it lasts like 10 minutes and you don't feel anything. But, this woman felt the need to like correct me about my, medical choice.
The real world fallout from all those snap judgments are why I'm not identifying patient 001 by his name. He works in an intensely intellectual and competitive field, and with a new baby at home, he can't risk losing business over people's mistaken assumptions. He remembers telling his family he had decided to volunteer for the DBS experiment. They were skeptical at first.
When you go to your mom and you explain, "Mom, this is what I'm considering," and she's like, "Are you insane? You're going to be a guinea pig, basically? You're going to have brain surgery?" It sounds like a bad sci-fi movie, right? At first, they were like, "What are you doing? This is so desperate. There's so many other things. You get yada, 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 yada." And then it's like, "Oh, you're back. You were right." You know what I mean? Yeah. So I was like, "I'm telling you." So that's why I didn't go to my family to sort of get their approval. I went to people that had gone through what I was going through. And it's not because your family's bad. Again, it's perspective. It's perspective.
Don't get me wrong. Patient 001 adores his family. But that doesn't mean they fully understood. In a way, their reaction tracks with the bad reputations of other treatments for depression and mental disorders more generally. Since their rise to prominence in the 1990s, antidepressants have been vilified by critics. Some people say these drugs can steal emotions and change personalities. ECT's reputation is still suffering from the damage done by movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And even talk therapy can bring shame and secrecy, though much less so today than in the past. So perhaps it's not surprising that the idea of electrodes implanted in the brain raises a whole new set of assumptions, of misgivings, and judgments. But this made me wonder, why? What's the difference between antidepressants, for instance, and DBS? Is there one? Emily has thought about this distinction a lot.
I think if you talk to someone in this day and age, just be my guest, and you said, "Oh, I'm taking Prozac and I'm scared it's going to change the core of me," then we'd be like, "Why?" And thinking about that argument with DBS, I could see why that would be potentially like more interesting to someone or potentially more plausible. But biochemically, if you look at what's happening and you say, "Oh, Prozac is changing me," or DBS is changing me, what does that even really mean? People are much more concerned about modifications to brain-based, like brain tissue or brain activity than they would be to the kidney. And obviously that makes sense because a lot of what we experience comes to our brains, but is that really where our self is? And why are people so sensitive about the self, especially when coming to thinking about invasive treatments versus something like Prozac?
I've been wondering the same thing. What sets the brain apart? And why are people so uncomfortable with attempts to change it? It's a part of our body, just like the lungs and the heart and the kidneys, like Emily says. So why do we get squeamish when it comes to our brains? In my reporting, I came across some examples of surprising side effects from DBS. One interesting case study sticks with me, and it highlights how the science here is very far from clear. A Dutch man was being treated for obsessive-compulsive disorder. When his stimulation was on, he developed a brand new and intense love of Johnny Cash hits, especially Ring of Fire, Folsom Prison Blues, and Sunday Morning Coming Down. Before DBS, his favorites were Dutch language songs and classics by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. But when his DBS was on, it was the Man in Black all the way. When his stimulation diminished, or when his batteries ran down, the man subconsciously switched back to listening to his old favorites. The anecdote might sound a little bit trivial. This guy's new musical taste didn't bother him. It's a very minor thing in the grand scheme of things. But that change, that switch, arguably bore straight to the core of our unease. So many of us consider our brains and the minds they create the bedrock of our identity. After all, it's where our memories live, our thinking, our personality, our worries, our taste in music. So, when a disease attacks the brain or a treatment changes the brain, we get nervous. None of us likes the thought of having a brain implant tell us what music we like, especially if we're not even aware of it. The stakes are much, much higher when it comes to how we feel, to our emotions. Reporting this story, I actually heard a lot of jokes about being a cyborg, being Bluetooth-enabled, bionic. People would kind of laugh as they said it, but is there anything more to these offhand comments? Does the brain implant change who you are in some fundamental way? Here's what John thinks.
I can only tell you that it is the exact opposite of that question. It purely eliminates the disease. It purely eliminates the factors and the issues that come about with the disease. That's it. It does not, sci-fi wise and movies and skits and all these shows we've seen, it does nothing about that. And, I've had, what's the word people have said before? Like, you're the bionic man, like friends of mine, right? They've said that. And you just, yeah, totally, dude.
Amanda echoes that sentiment.
Like, I don't feel like nothing I've done has ever changed who I am or my personality. Like, I'm still the same person. I'm suffering more or less. I feel like it lets me be me more, like, because I'm not fighting with myself to be alive. Like,
Emily says that who she is a choice. Her depression is the thing that took that choice away.
It really altered who I was. And of course, it's like this insidious progress. It's not just one day you have depression full blown. But I look back and I think about moments of one particularly disastrous meeting with a committee. And I want to go back and hug myself. And I'm almost upset, that I berated myself so much. But at that moment, that's what my brain was predisposed to. In that moment, in those times, what really felt salient was I am uniquely and horribly bad. Something is uniquely, horribly wrong with me. And now I don't have that feeling. So which of those is correct? I don't know, but I know which one I like better. So I don't know that's not a satisfactory answer for your question, but I think what really gets to the heart of it is I feel like I'm untethered and I have an ability now to focus on the things that I really do care about. And that's where my self lies.
Shannon O'Neill, the psychologist who has worked with John and others, has a way to help people think about their identity, about their self as they learn to live with DBS.
I do have some thoughts of that, of identifying who the self is outside of depression. And I think those are next steps that we transition to when they have that abstract, flexible thinking. One exercise I do is, and it's called the admirable person exercise. And it says, think about the individual that you absolutely admire in your life, not for fame, wealth, beauty, money, but who they are as a person. And it can be anyone you want. And usually that person they identify and the reasons why really gets to their core values of what they appreciate and what they want to live by with meaning and purpose. And we try to move towards that of how can we have committed action in that version of yourself going forward.
This way of defining yourself strikes me as particularly meaningful. This is purposeful. This is intentional. It's defining yourself in the way that you choose. These days, John says his self is lighter. Without the poison coursing through his body, John feels better, more energized, more present in his life. But as his daily surveys make very clear, he's still a little bit crabby.
So poison was way over here, was 9 out of 10, right? Before the disease. After the disease, it's at 0. I rate mental force field. So what mental force field is why can't I walk the dog, right? Like, why can't I do this? Like, that was at 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. That's now at a 1 out of 10, right? I'm still a dude. I still have hard times doing certain things, but like, going from a 10 out of 10 to a 1 out of 10 is incredible. And then the one that's pretty much remained consistent is irritability. And so irritability for me was at like a 6 or a 7 or an 8. Guess what? It's still at a 6 or a 7 or an 8. And so like my perspective to them on that is, it's not that the surgery didn't work. I guess I'm just like a cranky middle-aged dude now, right? Like that just is what it is.
Barbara is one of the best judges of who John is now. Is he someone new with DBS?
You can't say his old self. He never like wasn't himself through this whole process, right? It's just, he is more comfortable and happy and relaxed and productive and present, and engaged. So the things that the disease was trying to steal from him, he's getting back.
So no, John with a brain implant is not a new bionic John. He's just John. On the next and final episode, we're going to look to the future for John and to the future for DBS.
This is never where I expected to be. But you're here, so step up. Why wouldn't you step up? This is the experiment of a lifetime. It's even if right this second after this call, I had to stop, I wouldn't trade it for 1 second, but I'd sure like to see the last inning. And we're all in. I'm all in.
We're considering a bonus episode that addresses your questions, comments, and thoughts. Please send them to us at podcasts@sciencenews.org. If you or someone you know is facing a suicidal crisis or emotional distress, call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. This is The Deep End. I'm Laura Sanders. If you liked this podcast, tell your friends or leave us a review. It helps the show a lot. Send us your questions and comments at podcasts@sciencenews.org. The Deep End is a production of Science News. It's based on original reporting by me, Laura Sanders. This episode was produced by Helen Thompson and mixed by Ella Rowan. Our project manager is Ashley Yeager. Nancy Shute is our editor-in-chief. Our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. The podcast is made possible in part by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the John S. James L. Knight Foundation, and the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, with support from PRX.